Hey, welcome everybody. This is Ross. I'm happy to have another amazing special guest for a series of informal talks, completely optional for Zoomies, where we get to hear from great people from not from outside of Zoom. I'm going to hand it over to Arun in a minute to introduce Lorraine, who we got to work with. Lorraine is at Prezi. You know that we've deployed the Prezi app for all Zoomies. I will tell you just as a hint, the next version of their Zoom app is going to be frictionless and amazing. And so there's something pretty cool that we're doing kind of in partnership as companies, but this is more about people. And so I think actually, let me just hand it over to Arun to introduce, and then we'll just kind of keep flowing from there.
Sure.
Arun, yeah.
Thanks, Ross. So I'm going to start off with a fun fact. Uh, this should be no surprise to you, but over 70% of companies across America have adopted hybrid work, right? So that's 2 out of 3 companies. And this is across all industries, all kinds of categories, things like that. So our guest today, Lorraine, she's a top-rated virtual keynote speaker. She's a leader at the intersection of editorial and tech, right? So she's passionate about helping people accelerate their careers by standing out in the virtual office. So Lorraine, as Ross mentioned, is currently the head of editorial at Prezi. She's also a LinkedIn Learning instructor with a very popular course called Virtual and Hybrid Meeting Essentials. So as Zoomies, you have access to the course through Okta, so check it out. You have free access to LinkedIn Learning, and I'll drop a link to the course in the chat. Definitely bookmark it. But Lauren previously led editorial efforts at LinkedIn and SlideShare, where I was very fortunate enough to have been a colleague there. So I'm excited about today's talk for 3 reasons, right? One, as Ross alluded to, it coincides with the rollout of the Prezi Zoom app at Zoom. So we rolled it out to all Zoomies last week. So if you haven't yet had the chance to install it, please do install it and check it out. This is also going to be a masterclass in meeting productivity. And then last but not least, as people who build Zoom, I think this is very important for us to understand in terms of what makes meetings more productive. With that, I think we're going to get some very exciting insights from someone who's been there, done that. So please join me in welcoming Lorraine Lee.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Ross. And thank you to all the Zoomies who are here today. Remember the days when we presented in person? We were focused on getting our message across and engaging and energizing our audience. And then virtual came along, and it not only involved those 2 things, but a bunch of other factors that we had to figure out, like tech and creating a strong video presence. And now many of us are entering a hybrid model, which brings its own set of challenges, but ones that you're going to be ready to face after the session today. Imagine a world where your teammates leave your meeting raving about how productive it was. A meeting where it was possible to bond and get work done at the same time. And a meeting where you actually caught the eye of senior leadership because of how engaging your content was. All of this is possible, and today I'm going to give you 9 tips so that you can do all of those things and be a meeting rock star. And let's face it, meetings are not going away anytime soon, nor should they. However, the issue is that more and more seem to get added to the calendar, and they're becoming less and less effective, leading to things like burnout, video fatigue, and ineffective teams. There are a host of reasons that can make a meeting ineffective. Maybe the facilitator is speaking at you and not inviting you into the conversation. There's no clear agenda and everyone is just talking in circles. You've been raising your hand remotely and everyone else in person isn't noticing you and they're just having a conversation amongst themselves. Or my favorite, the meeting didn't need to be live and it really could have been an email. In this session, you're going to learn how to positively transform your meetings so that they shift away from situations like these here to ones where you will lead and participate impactfully and effectively while also learning how to create a, dare I say, enjoyable meeting experience. If you tune in for this session, kudos to you for realizing that meetings are one of the most important things we can and need to master if we want to be both a leader who influences change and drives results, and a leader who can create more engaged, productive, and happy teams. Now, for those who aren't entirely convinced yet, I want to share some data that highlights the pressing need to master meetings. 55% of employees prefer to work remotely at least 3 days a week. 96% of people who started working remotely due to COVID want to continue working remotely at least some of the time for the rest of their careers. And we are in 250% more meetings every day since the pandemic started, and we are spending more than 50% of our week in meetings, which adds up to about 21 and a half hours. That is a lot of time. The data is showing that offices are moving towards a hybrid model and that meetings continue to be a big problem. Now, for those who aren't familiar, I'm sure all of you are being at Zoom, but virtual meetings are meetings where everyone is dialing in from different locations, whereas a hybrid meeting is a meeting where some people might be calling from home, and then some people are calling together from the same office, the same location. So it's going to be a mix of those in-person and virtual colleagues. And today, I'm going to share 9 tips for how to best tackle both of these types of meetings. Before we dive in, I want to share who I am and why I'm here talking about meetings. As Arun mentioned, my name is Lorraine. I'm the head of editorial at Prezi, a virtual presentation and collaboration solution being used by the majority of the Fortune 1000 to make their meetings better. I'm also a LinkedIn learning instructor for the popular course of Virtual and Hybrid Meeting Essentials, and I was an editor at LinkedIn for 6 years where I worked on its video products and had my own video series. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to take screenshots during this session, post it on socials, tag me, and we can keep the conversation going even after I leave today. By the end of this hour, your meetings are going to become a way that you start getting noticed by your peers and senior leaders, because through your great meetings, you're going to be improving your organization's culture, reducing video fatigue, and building productive teams. I'll be covering 3 topics today around virtual and hybrid meetings. The first, how to plan and prepare for your meeting so that you're set up for success. The second, how to drive engagement during and after your meeting so that you ensure that you're generating ideas and also getting results. And the third, how to create captivating virtual presentations so that your content actually improves your meetings and doesn't detract from them. Now, as part of this session, we're going to be using Slido. So this is a great excuse for you to all take out your phones throughout the session. Slido is a polling tool that I'll be using to get a pulse from all of you on the different topics I'll be discussing. You can access it on your phone or on your browser at slido.com. Feel free to scan this QR code as well, and then type in the passcode Zoom Meetings to enter. Now, before we jump in, if you haven't done so already, please make sure to full screen your Zoom for the best viewing experience. With all the distractions and things we have to do in a day, standing out and keeping attention is really hard. One way you're going to be able to do this is by sticking to your schedule and being respectful of other people's time. It seems obvious, but it's amazing how many people still start meetings late and run over. So to manage your time well, you'll want to stay concise, meaning that you aren't planning an hour-long meeting for the sake of that hour-long meeting, or just because it's always been done that way. I think you probably have seen before, if you plan that hour-long meeting, the content is magically going to take up that full hour. So instead of 1 hour, try a 25-minute meeting. Or maybe you go even bolder, try a 15-minute meeting. I even know someone who does 8-minute syncs. You'll also want to make sure that you're being respectful with your colleagues' time, which means starting and ending on time. If you are known as someone who starts meetings late, guess what? Your team is likely also going to show up late, you're missing out on valuable time, and you're likely going to need to schedule another meeting to catch up on everything. If you start the meeting on time, people are going to get there on time. Otherwise, they'll know they're going to miss something. And this is great because you're really setting the tone for what you expect. The same thing goes with ending on time. Your colleagues likely have another meeting or something else on their calendar. I really believe that respecting your colleagues' time means respecting your colleagues. Now, I do have a caveat here when I say to end your meetings on time. Ending on time to me actually means ending 5 minutes ahead of the half hour, or maybe even 10 minutes ahead of the hour. When we were in person, we had time to run in between rooms, but virtual has made it so easy to just continuously schedule meetings back to back to back. And we really need to make sure that we are giving our teams these moments to context switch and, of course, to run to the bathroom. So we're going to move over to the Slido now. I'm curious to hear from all of you. How well do you feel like you manage your time in meetings currently? Do you end your meetings 5 to 10 minutes ahead of the half hour or hour? Do you typically run over? Or do you end on the half hour or hour? And there's no judgment here, whatever your answer is. It's just good to see where everyone is right now. Okay, a majority of you are ending on the half hour or hour. I think that's the most common situation. A few of you running over, and none of you ending early. So this is great. This is a few of you ending a little bit early. So this is a great thing you can start implementing right away. Now, after you have figured out the timing of it all, you'll want to next focus on creating a solid agenda. If I don't see an agenda in a meeting invite these days, I just don't even bother to accept it. Without an agenda, meetings are really aimless, they're unfocused, and they're unstructured. Now, when you create your agenda, you'll always want to include your goal. And I actually had a colleague at LinkedIn who would start off every meeting saying, "This meeting will be a success if," fill in the blank. And when she started saying that, it sounded kind of funny to me at first, but it actually was just, it was so explicit, it kept us really focused and we knew what we needed to achieve in that meeting. So I like to recommend including no more than 3 items for every 30-minute meeting to ensure that you have enough time to discuss each item and so that the conversation can remain focused. With each agenda item, take it a step further and indicate how much time you want each discussion topic to take. And make sure to jot down what the clock should read so that you're not having to do mental gymnastics in your head while you're facilitating at the same time. So this here is what I would consider to be a really solid agenda. It's going to be a little bit of extra work to kind of, figure out the timing of it all and how you want to break it up. But it's going to be less work than if you had to schedule multiple additional meetings to get something done because you weren't this focused to begin with. Now, I'll turn it back to you all now. As you reflect on your own meetings, think about the ones that you've had that could have benefited from the focus and structure of an agenda, if you haven't already been including them. And then think about the first meeting that you want to add an agenda to right after watching this session. Next, let's talk about leveraging async communications. For those who aren't familiar, async communications is communication that is not dependent on time and it's not expecting an immediate response. So that might be things like email or maybe collaborating on a Google Doc, whereas chat programs like Slack or Teams or WebEx usually imply that you're looking for kind of that immediate back and forth. So if you look at the schedule of these 3 people here, you would only have overlapping working hours here in this blue section, so async would need to be used for all the time in the yellow here. Now, async communications is one of my favorite types of communication, both before and after a meeting. So I want to give you all an example that you probably can relate to. I got invited to join this task force, and they wanted to figure out next steps for how we were going to implement this new policy. There's actually no meeting Wednesdays for Prezi. There was no other information. I asked if there was some more context I could get async. Once I got the context, I then asked if there was async work we could do ahead of time so that the meeting wasn't used to have an unstructured conversation. It was just very ambiguous to me. They wanted to know what we should have included in a guidebook that we were creating. And I really thought it was going to be more beneficial to have something concrete to work off of versus kind of general discussion in a live meeting. So I ended up spending the next hour writing 5 pages of best practices for a guidebook. And when I sent it to the team, we didn't even need the meeting after all. We just commented on the doc. That was the perfect way to work. And with this piece of content, we had something really tangible that we could work off of, and we didn't end up rescheduling that meeting in the end. Now, there are other ways that async can also be beneficial. You can perhaps replace status update meetings and let your team get your updates on their own time. And when you can give your team more flexibility to watch videos or to read communications on their own time, they're just going to be happier and more productive because they're doing it at a time that works for them. You can give context ahead of a meeting or maybe get feedback ahead of a call, which is the example I just shared. And then you can also use async after the meeting. So summarize what was covered as well as next steps. And video is going to be a lot better at capturing tone and making sure your message and meaning don't get confused. So I like to recommend video when possible. Now, the key takeaway here is that by leveraging more async communications and videos in particular, it's going to make the live meetings you have that much more productive and meaningful, and your team is going to be more alert, and just willing to participate because they know you only schedule live meetings when completely necessary. So let's go back to the Slido now. I want you to think of a meeting that you can experiment with later this week or early next week. How will you leverage async for that particular meeting? You might send a pre-read, you might send a video ahead of or after the meeting. Maybe you want to replace a meeting entirely and experiment with that. Maybe you'll try a few of these, and maybe some of you still need to think it through because I know I just gave a lot of different ideas. Yes, nice. A lot of you want to replace a meeting. That's awesome. Okay, it's about equal between send a pre-read, replace a meeting, a few of these. It's funny watching these. It always feels like a horse race, just going up and down so quickly. Okay, awesome. It looks like the majority of you want to replace a meeting. So I think that is an awesome thing to experiment with next week, and then get feedback from your team afterwards, see how they liked it. So now that we are all set up to plan and prepare appropriately, let's dive into our first recap. To plan and prepare effectively for your hybrid meetings, we'll want to focus on time management, always including an agenda and a goal, and leveraging async. Next, let's dive into what we need to drive engagement during and after our meetings. We will first need to create a really strong foundation in the meeting itself. And that means that we need to designate rules of engagement, which indicate how we want people to participate. So I like to recommend that above 4 participants, you really should ideally be using the hand raise feature. Now, this is really important to ensure that all voices are included, and especially true for introverts. So as an introvert myself, I can tell you that once the meeting hits 5 people, I start getting really overwhelmed, just trying to figure out when to unmute and when to jump in. And in a hybrid setting, this is even more critical because you don't want some people speaking up in the room together, whereas the remote attendees are raising their hand and some are unmuting. That's just going to be a mess. So create those rules of engagement. It can be whatever you want, but just make sure that you're defining those. Now, I also like to encourage people to use the chat feature or something like Prezi's on-screen responses. The important thing here is that if you are leading the meeting, I want you to make sure that you are acknowledging when you see something in the chat, when you see something on someone's screen, so that they know that they're being heard, and it's not just the people speaking up who get the acknowledgement, either in the office or virtually. And I also want to emphasize that it's important to remember that speaking up in a virtual or hybrid meeting is super different than speaking up in person. We can't read the room as well through body language and facial gestures, so these clear rules really are critical to ensure that everyone feels comfortable participating and also that they feel valued and seen. Now, I'll ask you all to reflect now on your own meetings. What do you think your rules of engagement will be? What can you do to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate? And after you come up with these rules, don't forget to add them into your agenda and also state them at the start of the call as a reminder. Next, you'll want to ensure that if one dials in, all dial in. Now, one dials in, all dial in is going to ensure a lot more equity in meetings, especially in a hybrid office. If one person in your meeting is virtual, really all of them should be virtual. And this is probably going to solve 90% of the issues that many people are experiencing in hybrid offices. Nothing creates a more inequitable experience and everyone talking in the room, and there's just that one person who's virtual and they're struggling to hear what's going on and they can't really see people's faces. It's just really a horrible experience. Now, for those of you who are in the office, you should all be on your own laptops, either at your desk, or if you still all want to be around each other, just grab a conference room, make sure your laptops are in front of you, and then make sure that you're using one central microphone in the room to avoid any sound feedback. Next, let's talk about the importance of using power words ahead of and during your meeting. So at this point, you've planned and prepared for your meeting, you have everyone set up for the call, and now we need to continue to engage them. And one way we'll do that is with power words. So what are power words exactly? Power words trigger an emotional or psychological reaction when you hear them, either in a positive or negative way, and let's talk about the positive way right now. So this is an example of what we hear a lot in meetings and presentations. This data shows that we're on track. Great. How can we improve this? This exciting new data shows that we are gaining command of the market. Words do matter, and power words really can act as that dopamine hit to the brain. This is because when you're using power words, you're kind of waking people up out of autopilot from hearing the same boring thing that they're used to hearing. And our brains, we really want to hear and see things that excite us. So by using power words, you're helping to create more energy and varied tone in your voice, which is going to help make what you're saying more interesting to listen to versus kind of those monotonous presentations and updates many of us are probably way too used to. So here's a list of power words, just a few of my favorites that you can use in your next meeting. There are hundreds out there. So I'd like us to move back over to the Slido, and I'd like you to jot down what's a power word that you're going to commit to using again in the coming week at one of your next meetings. We'll see if there are sometimes you see trends in companies that some words are more popular than others, or you don't even have to use anything on this list. Feel free to add your own creative one as well. Supercharge, data, transform, reinforce. All right, it's quite spread out right now. Happy, that's a nice one. Foundation, innovate. This is great. All right, transform is taking the lead, so keep typing away. And I love always getting inspiration from everyone filling out their favorite words. Zoomitude. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it does sound positive and it sounds good. So thanks for adding that. All right, awesome. I'm going to keep this open. Feel free to keep adding your words. And I want to talk about another powerful example of what power words can do. So power words are also really great because they can prime people so that they enter your call energized and already ready to engage. So I want to tell you about this yogurt study by Brian Wansink. Basically, Brian got a room of people together in a dark room, and he asked them to rate how strawberry yogurt tasted to them. Now, 59% of people thought it had a really nice strawberry flavor, but it turns out it was chocolate yogurt the whole time. But because Brian had asked them to taste and rate the strawberry yogurt, they had been primed to expect a strawberry flavor. Now you can do the same thing with the words you're using ahead of your video calls. Now, how many of us have gotten a calendar invite that looks something like this? I'm kind of already dreading it. Lorraine and Andrew one-on-one. What does Andrew want? But what if we changed it to something like this? Power brainstorm, design ideas for company rebrand. I now know what the meeting is about. It feels more high energy when I see words like power and brainstorm. So I know I need to show up with ideas. And, there's even that emoji, which I really like doing. It, on quick scan, visuals are great. And now I see the brain. I know it has something to do with a brainstorm. So it just looks already a little bit more fun, just adding that visual there. Once you have primed people to come with this energy and mindset, you're going to be better positioned to have more fruitful discussions during the meeting itself. And that leads us to tip number 5, encouraging participation. To encourage participation and avoid meetings where you have that one person just talking at everyone the whole time, you'll want to use the passive to active meeting framework. Now, I created this framework to break down what I see as the essential steps that facilitators need to consider when leading a video call, and feel free to download it with this QR code or at that link and jot down your notes. Now, the first step is to warm up the crowd, and I really believe that meeting facilitators are kind of the workplace entertainers of today. We really need to put on that hat of entertainer when we facilitate a meeting, and we need to find new ways to engage people and get their energy levels up. Now, video, for better or for worse, video requires us to do more than we did in person because video kind of mutes energy on camera, and we have to do more to break through that screen. Now, I'm sure we've also all been on those calls where everyone joins and it's kind of awkwardly silent, or maybe the small talk is always asking about the group's weekend or the weather, and that's already setting the tone for the meeting, and people are already going to go into it not very excited. Instead, you can do things like play music, as Ross was doing earlier for this webinar, have a question of the week to kick things off, or just simply ask more creative questions like, what are you working on right now that you're really excited about, or what are you binging right now? The second is to invite people to participate. So really show that you want people's ideas and opinions by asking questions. Now, one great idea I heard recently was to have everyone ask a question at the start of a meeting to show that all questions are valued from all members of the team, regardless of level. You can also try things like polls, a Zoom poll to get the juices flowing, or maybe you ask people to write something down and reflect on something. Just show that you want it to be a two-way interaction. After you invite them into the conversation, pause at least 5 seconds. In American culture, 4 seconds is when people start getting uncomfortable. And I will just say it now, you're going to get uncomfortable too. Being quiet for a long time is awkward, but you do get used to it after doing it enough times, and I just bask in the awkward silences now. Now, someone usually speaks up at second 5, and that will often trigger another thought or another question in someone's mind. So pausing really helps solicit participation. And again, when you pause and you invite people in to participate, you'll want to remind them that they can also contribute in the chat or maybe through other virtual collaboration tools, which I will touch on shortly. Then you'll want to observe and listen. Repeat back what you're hearing to show that you're tuned in, label problems you hear, lean in towards the screen for a physical indicator of engagement, and note down areas that you might want to follow up on. And then you can interact by asking follow-up questions, building on top of what someone said, and then simply thanking people for chiming in. Video is still scary to a lot of people. People feel really uncomfortable with it. So let's find ways to create that safe space and make people feel comfortable and valued. And then we start back at the invite step again. Now let's go back to the Slido, and I would love to hear from all of you, which step do you want to focus on first? Do you want to focus on your warm-up, inviting people into the conversation, pausing, observing and listening, or interacting once you get kind of that, that participation? Okay, nice. This is usually the trend I see. A lot of people want to focus on the warm-up because you want to have a strong opening. It makes sense. All right, nice. Yeah, warm-up is the clear winner here. Keep voting. I'll leave this open. Thank you all for sharing. So let's move on to asking specific questions. And this is going to be really helpful as well for the passive to active meeting framework we just went over. How many of us have been called to a meeting with a loose agenda where the organizer says they want to talk through a problem, but it's not exactly clear what the problem is because it's such a broad topic? You arrive to the meeting and they kick it off with a really open-ended question that you could answer in 10 different ways depending on what exactly it is they want to learn about. When you can come to the meeting with very specific questions you want answered, it helps focus the conversation and it allows you to think through what issues or questions you want resolved ahead of the call instead of figuring it out during the call itself. So instead of, I want to discuss our concerns if we move our blog, you can try something like, what concerns do we have moving our blog for 3 key areas: SEO, design, and engineering? What is going to impact your team the most, and is there anything else we should consider? Instead of, how do we want to proceed with this task force? You can ask questions like, what is our success metric? How often do we want to meet? What work can be done async? Now, I shared that example of the great agenda before, and these questions are going to be really helpful to support your agenda during the call. They don't necessarily need to be written on the agenda itself, but you should know what you're trying to solve for within each topic. These questions are going to be how you get your answers. Now, as a facilitator, you can also consider sending these questions ahead of time as async prep to get people thinking before joining the meeting. And who knows, maybe people start typing in their responses and you end up realizing you don't need the meeting after all. Next, I want to talk about some tools you can also use to help facilitate these conversations. So let's open up our hybrid toolkit. We hear a lot of people talking about Zoom fatigue and video burnout, but I really think that this is because people aren't using virtual to its full potential. Burnout and Zoom fatigue don't have to be a thing. We are on video, but we're just using it in the worst ways possible, screen shares and just ineffective ways to collaborate. So I'm going to share a few of my favorite tools with you to make your hybrid collaboration better. So starting off with Atlassian, which we use for Confluence and Jira. Slido, which I'm using right now, obviously a fan of this tool. Love the ability to upvote questions. There are also word clouds and other fun functionality as well. Menti is a similar one to Slido. Figma for collaborating on designs. Miro is another similar tool. I recently discovered that Poly has a meeting feedback tool within Slack, which makes it super easy to get feedback after a meeting to see how it went. And then, of course, Prezi Video for more engaging meetings and presentations. Now let's move back over to the Slido. So this is actually one of my favorite questions to ask, because I'm sure all of you too, working on Zoom apps and just, you're ingrained in this world. So would just love to hear, what tools you're currently using that you love, either from this list, or feel free to add some new ones. I always discover one or two new ones whenever I give this talk. Kahoot, that's such a fun one, yeah. Coda, okay, a few people using Zoom. A lot of company spirit here. Okay, a lot of Coda. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I'll have to check it out. Looks like it's something that a lot of Zoomies use. Okay, someone wants to learn Prezi. Awesome. Whiteboard. Yep, that's a good one. Awesome. A few of you want to use Prezi. I'll give you more information about that at the end. Zoom polls. Love it. Miro. Yeah, so keep adding. I'll keep this open. I just love to review it afterwards just to see what comes up. So let's talk about what to do after the live meeting is over with tip number 6. To me, everything that happens after the meeting is just as important as what happens before and during. And actually, I think it can be considered even more important, because the actions you take afterwards are going to ensure that your work and what you discuss actually comes to fruition. And I really believe that it can make or break trust within a team. And trust is really everything in a virtual and hybrid office, where you might not see your coworkers face to face very often and be able to build relationships as easily. So the first thing you'll want to do, this is like one of my favorite tips, set clear deadlines and assign clear action items. Remember earlier I said end meetings 5 minutes before the half hour or hour? Before that happens, save an additional few minutes before the meeting ends to make sure that everyone is clear on next steps. Then I recommend creating temporary chat channels. So these channels are one of my favorite ways to keep conversation in one place and really to hold people accountable for their tasks. And I'm sure many or most of us have way too many channels. So what I like to do for specific projects is to include the word temp in the channel to indicate that this is something that eventually will be archived after it's completed. So this is one I archived a few months back, content marketing backfill temp. It served its purpose. It kept us all together in one group. It was easy to search for things. And then we got to archive it, and it felt good. With chat channels, I recommend making deadlines super, super clear by mentioning both the day and the time you want something due to make sure that your asks are crystal clear. So this is kind of the typical scenario I see. I might, say, Arun, can you give me feedback on this next week? And Arun goes, sure. Okay, what does next week mean? To me, maybe it means Wednesday, and to Arun, it means he has until Friday. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific. Arun, can you give me feedback by Wednesday? And again, we're still not sure. Maybe I need it by midday because I want to review it before I have to turn it in Thursday. And Arun thinks he has until the end of the day. So now I'm wasting my time checking in, and Arun feels micromanaged by me because we just had a miscommunication, and it just wasn't clear on alignment on when it was due. But if I say, Arun, can you please give me feedback or turn this in by Wednesday, 12 p.m. Pacific time, there is no room for confusion there. If Arun agrees and we both committed, we're building that trust. I'm going to trust that Arun's going to turn it in at that time. And if not, that's a separate conversation we need to have. I know Arun will turn it in on time. So those were our 3 tips for driving engagement. Let's go into our recap. To drive engagement during and after the meeting, you'll want to create a strong foundation through rules of engagement, making sure everyone is dialed in, literally and figuratively, and priming with power words. We'll want to facilitate and encourage conversations with the passive to active meeting framework, asking specific questions, and using your hybrid toolkit. And then, of course, have your post-meeting actions ready with temporary chat channels and a game plan for following up with very specific deadlines. Now, lastly, I'm going to share some tips for how you can create captivating virtual presentations, since presentations are a major cornerstone to our meetings. Now, many of us continue to see presentations where the presenter is screen sharing, they're sitting on a slide for 10 minutes, and your response is either this or this, when you should really look more like this. So how do we make sure that we're standing out and your audience isn't tuning out? One way we can do this is with the Think, Do, Feel matrix. Now, the Think, Do matrix was created by author and professor Andrew Abella. And what this matrix was meant to do was help you map out how your audience currently thinks right now and what they're currently doing. And it helps you decide how you want these things to change after they see your presentation. Now, the Think, Do, Feel matrix has since been modified by Presi's Spencer Waldron to become the Think, Do, Feel matrix, because emotion is going to be so important in connecting with your teammates and clients and persuading them to make changes or to take action. And if we're really honest with ourselves, emotions are often what end up driving decisions, and then facts and logic kind of come in after the fact to justify or fill in the gaps. Now, these days, I mentioned earlier, we're all so busy. It's really hard to focus on customization or making things specific based on who we're talking to. So if you can fill this out and just, take a few minutes to think it through, you're going to be miles ahead of your peers. And if you don't have the answers for how people are thinking, doing, feeling right now, this is a great time to ask those questions to fill this out. So, take a stab before your next presentation. This is an example of one I did for this keynote. Now, this matrix is going to definitely help you create a more memorable presentation because you're going to have a better understanding of who your audience is, what you want them to walk away with, which of course, when you know these things, you just can build a lot more customized content for them. Now, once you fill this out, the next thing you'll need to do is add movement to your presentation. So adding movement is going to spike your viewers' attention by boosting dopamine in the brain. There's a reason why we love watching Netflix and Hulu, etc. And while I can't promise that your next video is going to be as exciting as a car chase, you can definitely get closer to it if you start adding some movement. So let's take a moment here to really confirm this hypothesis by moving back to the Slido. So this is one of my favorite questions to ask. So for the last 15 seconds or so, were you primarily drawn to watching the video of the car chase? Were you staring at the picture of the car chase? Or were you looking at me? And put it in the Slido here. I won't be offended if you weren't looking at me. Yeah, most people, they're drawn to the video. Interesting. I always find it curious when people are looking at the picture of the car chase, but that's great. Yeah, that's what your eyes were drawn to, but most of us are drawn to the video, right? There was a lot more going on. And so you're seeing really firsthand just how powerful movement can be in drawing attention. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like that video was so fun to watch, like so many things were moving. There was a lot going on. We had to, figure out what to look at. And it was just a lot more engaging. And our brains really get bored quickly looking at something that hasn't changed. And so that's why when someone's on a static slide for 10 minutes, that's why it's so easy to zone out. And as you can see by this example here, that's why action movies are so exciting because they're pretty much the opposite of that. Oops. There we go. Now I like to recommend at least 2 slides or movements per minute in a virtual setting. And they really don't have to be big movements with crazy animations. For example, you can do subtle movements like this to keep the audience engaged. And anytime you can add some novelty like with what I just did, our brains just love it and we pay even closer attention. So now that we have movement down, let's talk about our last tip for creating captivating presentations, visuals. Now, I think many of us have probably heard various stats showing just how powerful visuals are. For example, 90% of the information processed by the brain is visual, or 80% of people remember what they see versus what they hear and read. And visual aids have been found to improve learning by up to 400%. Have you ever told a story where everyone was really attentive and they were super excited about what you had to say next? That's really what we want with our presentations too. And if you're using visuals well, your viewers are going to be more tuned in and better retain what you're sharing with them. So this visual here is probably what we see most often on slides. Plain, bullets, and kind of boring. But if we took it one step further, look at how much better these can be. And you don't have to be a designer to create these. There are templates out there, either Prezi or somewhere else, where you can create these visuals. And the visuals here, they make you look so much more prepared, put together. And again, we talked about priming with the power words. These visuals are priming people to think, okay, this person, they are prepared, they know what they're talking about. This is going to be a great presentation. Now, the last way visuals give the wow effect is when you can implement what I like to call the teacher effect. So when you can use visuals and walk through content, kind of similar to how a teacher would at the front of the classroom, I'm talking about, this is amazing, the Zoom org, just picking up so many new learnings today. There's that added level of authority and competence that you exude. And especially when it comes to data and numbers, which some might describe as maybe a little bit drier content at times, it really becomes that much more imperative to get creative with visuals and really, again, take advantage of what's possible in our virtual environment. We don't have to stick to what we've always been doing. Now, think about the next presentation you'll have and think about those slides you typically add a lot of text for and how you might be able to replace some of that text with a visual. Now, let's enter our next recap. To create captivating virtual presentations, you'll want to use the Think, Do, Feel matrix, add movement, and use visuals. And believe it or not, that concludes our 9 tips. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, if you have any additional questions or just want to connect, you can add me on LinkedIn. If you're looking for more tips on how to accelerate your career and stand out in the virtual office, I send out a weekly newsletter, just short and sweet, tactical tips. And then actually I have a feedback link here, but I think it wasn't working earlier. So I'm just going to fix that afterwards and maybe Arun can send it out afterwards. But I'm just really appreciative of feedback, always looking to improve. It will just take 30 seconds to a minute. So would really appreciate you filling that out once I have that updated. And some of you may be wondering how you can start using Prezi. So the great news, as Ross and Arun mentioned, is that it is available to all Zoomies. Just search for Prezi in Okta. And there's also an ISV Prezi plus Zoom external channel for tutorials and FAQs. And then there are going to be upcoming weekly Prezi office hours, and those times and days are still being determined, but you can find out about those in the Slack channel. Now, remember, meetings are not something to be dreaded, even though I think a lot of people feel this way right now. They're actually such a huge opportunity to really get noticed, to stand out, to make an impact at your company. And I'm just so excited for you to get started. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you at a future meeting. Cool. And I will pass it back over to Arun for a Q&A now.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lorraine. Ross, do you want to?
Yeah, let me go ahead and tee this up. So we have a little thing at Zoom. Of course, we're crazy about our Zoom apps, right? And one of the ones that we use is Coda, which you heard people mention. Lorraine, you'll see this as a screen share if you haven't installed the app. I did give you access to the doc.
Yes, I see it. Okay, join.
Yeah, and everyone else, if you're a Coda user, you can jump in, click on the button, ask questions. I think we could use more. And then we can upvote or even downvote questions. But why don't I go ahead and start with Arun, would you like to vocalize your question?
Sure. I think this was a shared sentiment. A lot of folks were very curious and also very impressed by your presentation visuals, right? And of course the content. But if you could walk us through how did you build out this presentation and how do you do this?
Of course. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I can't take all the credit. So I have some design skills, kind of. So for this presentation in particular, we have designers at Prezi, and so they built the foundation of the presentation in a product called Prezi Present. So I think for those of you who are familiar with Prezi from the past 10 years, it's our presentation product. And then I imported it into Prezi Video, which is a separate app. And that is how I was controlling it through the Zoom call. And yeah, and it just is super seamless. It connects with Zoom super easily. You just have to select the Prezi camera, and then it's all connected. But there are, of course, templates as well. Like I definitely have used templates before. I try to not create something from scratch if I can avoid it, because why make things more complicated than they need to be.
Awesome. I will go ahead and this is a question I asked. How do
Mhm.
you find the balance between entertainment and communication?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when I think about virtual presenting or just presentations generally now, I really think of them as creating experiences. And I think, I would hope that, my presentation just now was fun, but also still professional and helpful. So I think it's just a combination of, understanding who your audience is, and then you can still make it entertaining through zoom ins and fade ins and things like that, without it coming across silly or unprofessional. So I think just understanding your audience and then, maybe just showcasing it or just sending an async video to a coworker, get their take on it. But I think usually we can kind of trust, what we're creating kind of makes sense for that audience. But yeah, it's definitely like two things that you want to incorporate into any presentation. Unless it's like maybe a board presentation or something and they don't want to see all of that. But generally, I like to say try to create an experience, and the entertainment factor can still be professional just through like fade ins or stickers or things like that, or videos, for example.
Cool. And then, Selena, could I ask you to vocalize your question?
Sure. Hi, Lorraine. Thank you
Hi.
for the amazing presentation. I was just wondering, when you were talking about async communications, what metric do you use when deciding if a communication or a question is more effective async versus in a meeting?
Yeah, I think a little bit of that is trial and error. So what I actually like to do is, if I'm kind of on the fence if something should be async or live, I'll usually pose the question to the group and I'll, ask them to emoji vote or just let me know if they would prefer to do it async. And oftentimes, more often than not, people want to try it async first. So I'm always willing to experiment and see how it goes. I just think the thing with async is, as I mentioned before, with the deadlines, we just want to make sure that we're being super clear on when we need feedback by and when we need action items complete by, and we need that commitment from the team if they all decide that they want to do async. Otherwise, it's very easy in Slack channels, for example, for everyone to say, yes, let's do async. And then the project kind of just, it slowly moves along just because people aren't checking as frequently as, as a live meeting kind of forces you to all be there at the same time. So yeah, lean on your team, see what they think.
Cool. We've got a little bit of questions about how to use Prezi, and what I'm going to do is I'm also just going to drop a link to the shared chat channel that we
Nice.
have. If you click on that, you can go there. There's the whole team. You can, if you've got trouble finding it in like Okta or something like that, I think we could handle those questions there.
Yeah.
And maybe our top voted question, because we have votes. Andy, could I ask you to vocalize your question?
Hi, Lorraine. Thank you for
Hi.
the presentation.
Huh?
I was just thinking, your camera and your mic is like really great. So I was wondering about what your setup looked like.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that. I actually made two LinkedIn posts within the past few weeks. One talking about my background, one talking about my foreground. So I'll share those with Arun later, so you can all kind of see like the diagram I made. But essentially, my camera is a Logitech Brio, and I have some lights set up behind there, so I think that also really helps with the camera quality. And then I just have this kind of like a generic microphone from Amazon. It's called Fifine, I think is how I don't know how you pronounce it. But yeah, it serves all my needs. I know sometimes people talk about like Blue Yeti as kind of the ideal microphone, but I'm all about function, but also cost. I don't think we need to spend tons of money to create a great camera setup, or create a good video setup. So those are the two things that I would recommend. And I have a standing desk now, as you can see as well.
Let's see. We have a question from Bora. Do you mind vocalizing it?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Lorraine. This was a great presentation.
Thanks.
I'm a new grad PM in the Zoom Apps team,
Okay.
and I meet a lot with the engineers and designers and other PMs as well. Sometimes there could be some stuff that I'm not exactly sure about.
Mm.
And sometimes I'm just afraid to ask about them during a live meeting because I don't want to interrupt the discussions going on.
Sure.
What do you think is the best way for the new grads to get up to speed in their new teams?
Yeah, well, I love that you're asking this and being so proactive about learning. I would say I would say try to find someone in that meeting who can kind of be your meeting buddy or ally, and someone you can feel comfortable with asking after the fact. So just jot down your questions during the call itself and meet with people from that meeting. Let them know you want to keep learning and get caught up on all these terms. And I think people will really appreciate that you're spending the time to do that, and you'll be able to build kind of closer connections that way. So I think, hopefully there's someone in the meeting you can trust to ask these questions to. If not, maybe your manager might have an idea of what some of these terms are. But I think, yeah, trying to find an ally and then jotting down your questions, and then even speaking to the project lead or the meeting facilitator and letting them know, there's a lot of jargon being used. I'm new. I want to definitely keep up. Is there other documentation that I can read before or after? Or maybe you take it upon yourself as a project to create that documentation for future new teammates who join. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here where you can both learn and then also show your leadership, which is exciting.
Keeping in practice with what Lorraine suggested about ending 5 minutes early, I think we're going to do that. And maybe if one Zoomie wants to just ask a question, please. Questions, comments, feedback. Everybody, when they present, loves feedback. We can always give that. Yeah.
Yes, always love feedback. And again, if you need a little bit more time to think about it, like I'm an introvert, it takes me some time. Feel free to send me a note on LinkedIn afterwards too.
And I love how James has followed the practice of raising his hand emoji. So go ahead, James. Yeah.
Lorraine, thank you so much. I just wanted to give you a feedback by saying that you have made Perezi and Zoom even more exciting and interesting.
Oh, thanks.
You're literally showing what the future should look like, and I'm super excited. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, James. That means a lot. Thank you so much.
William?
James stole my remark. Yeah, less a question and more just the excitement, at least, on my side for Prezi and everything that this does for the Zoom experience. So thank you. And you're clearly a professional and certainly outperformed the best of any of my own presentation capabilities too. So
awesome.
Thanks, William. Yeah, no, once you all start using Prezi, I'm sure you'll all be able to do this and be just as impressive. So thank you so much.
Right. Awesome. And with that, why don't we go ahead and wrap up? We will be posted. We haven't scheduled the next Zoom session yet. In the Coda doc, which we've shared, there's a place that you can nominate speakers. If there's folks that you'd like for us to bring in, we will be posting a recording of this all over the place that you can share with friends who unfortunately could not make it. And I think we're at time. Thanks again, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Bye.